Hi everyone. Now that we have learned how to identify and define social issues, assess needs and determine strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and we have talked about different theories and models of social change, including the different social innovation frameworks of paradigm shifts, actions, and structures. Now we're going to be looking at specific strategies and tactics to use in a social action plan to affect social change. Strategies and tactics are specific methods implemented in order to accomplish your change goals. It's the actual activities that you engage in to bring your action plan to fruition. There are 6 main categories of strategies employed by change agents to achieve change goals. Depending on the source that you look at, you might see different terminology used, but in general, these are the 6 basic umbrella terms that describe major social action strategies. So overall, they are legislation, policy, alliance building, media and public relations, disruption, and target meetings. Legislation has to do with enacting new legislation. A legislative strategy involves working with lawmakers, either like student government board members, a city council member, or a state legislator or congressperson, or at either the state or the federal level, really. It's the effort to enact a new law through a legislative body or through a ballot measure to be voted on by citizens. It should be noted that another way to change the law is through a legal strategy using the court system, for example, case law. Through policy social action strategies, change agents try to change a policy within an institution. A policy strategy involves meeting with the individuals and committees that oversee particular policies and try to make a request for a change based on facts and evidence and research. The change might be to improve an administrative system or create a new public program. One thing that often corresponds with policy action strategies is the technique of collaboration. So using collaboration to work with local authorities or other authorities or agencies in order to bring about improvements in existing social policy is one way to do this, and through consensus building. That's part of the collaborative process. So the underlying assumption of this approach is the homogeneity of values and interests through which substantive agreement on proposed interventions or policy changes can be obtained. So it doesn't involve loss or gain of power or authority or money per se, but change occurs within a consensus that includes both values and interests. Other specific tactics under the policy social action strategy includes bargaining. So by bargaining, we mean things like lobbying or submitting petitions or information and publicity campaigns. Those are all examples of bargaining as part of a policy social action strategy. The next social action strategy is alliance building. And alliance building is used when a group realizes that they can't win a campaign by themselves and they need more power to win. So they find friends of their cause, allies. Alliance or coalition building involves a group working together with other groups such as labor unions, nonprofit organizations, business organizations, community coalitions, faith communities, or those types of entities. And the purpose of working together is to win a particular campaign, win or achieve your social change goal that all have a vested interest in. Media and public relations are a type of direct action. They can sometimes be confrontational, which might include violent or illegal actions, but most of the time they're peaceful and nonviolent, persuasive acts. And they use tactics or techniques like picketing or rallying, marches, street theater, and public hearings to get out its message. So rallying, for example, we've heard a lot about these just like during campaign time frames, right? So campaign rallies are very popular, very common during election times. Examples of marches might include things like the Million Man March or the 2017 Women's March. Examples of picketing can be found particularly in the auto industry. There were famous ones with regard to the GM auto factories that had lots of picketing back in the 70s and 80s. There were many teachers across the country involved in picketing campaigns after the Parkland school shooting in Florida. You have sometimes seen picketing happening outside of businesses or hospitals. Oftentimes those are workers who are frustrated about maybe collective bargaining processes going on or labor union, labor disputes, and maybe unions that are actively participating in, not actively participating, but actively supporting the employees and their efforts in picketing. A few years ago, there was a major picketing effort with Marriott hotels because of labor disputes. Other examples that are pretty common that you're probably familiar with are people who are picketing outside of abortion clinics and such. Other examples would be demonstrations like gay pride parades or pro-life or anti-abortion demonstrations, or vigils for survivors or victims of domestic violence, for example, or related to the loss of lives through military action or that type of thing. Protest is another example of a media and public relations strategy. So you might think about all of the protests that happened in 2020 after the death of George Floyd, the 1963 March on Washington, which is when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech, protests against the Vietnam War, or protests during the Civil Rights Movement. Those are all examples of protest efforts through media and public relations strategies. Street theater is another example. There are many different groups that perform street theater. One example is Code Pink. So you might be familiar with that. And okay, so those are some examples of specific techniques under media and public relations social action strategies. The next strategy involves disruption. So these are activities that usually involve non-cooperation, or there's some kind of an intervention. It includes things like walkouts or takeovers or sit-ins. And it might be considered like, taking over or occupying a building or an office or a street. Sometimes you'll see these kinds of activities occur with environmentalists or animal protection rights organizations will often use disruptive strategies in order to change. So some examples of disruptive techniques are strikes. So I gave you an example earlier in the semester, actually, where there was a scholar strike where people observed in academia and education systems by not teaching or holding class one day and doing some PR campaigns over social media. Other examples of strikes are often associated with railroad workers or miners or automakers. Those have been high profile throughout history. Examples of walkouts. There was a National School Walkout Day after the Parkland school shootings a couple of years ago. Recently, there was the Judiciary Committee for this that did a walkout during the Supreme Court Justice appointmentship of I totally spaced her name, but Amy Coney Barrett, the newest Supreme Court nominee. So there was a lot of controversy over that. So the Democrats in the Judiciary Committee did a walkout the day that she was being appointed to the Supreme Court. Boycotts are another technique of media and public relations, of disruption strategies for social action. Boycotts. So for example, the Montgomery bus boycott, that is what occurred after Rosa Parks famously refused to give up her seat on a public bus in Montgomery, Alabama. So you know that had a big influence over other actions that took place during the Civil Rights Movement. The 1980 Summer Olympics, the U.S. boycotted to take a stand against the Soviet Union's influence in Afghanistan and the war between those two countries. So the U.S. boycotted the 1980 Summer Olympics. So another example is occupying spaces. So we think about things like Occupy Wall Street. We also might think about recent examples with the Keystone Pipeline, when groups of Native Americans were occupying the land, the sacred native land that was slated to be gone through to build the pipeline. So they were occupying that space in an effort to disrupt the passing of that and the building of the pipeline. So basically, these efforts of disruption, disruptive strategies and techniques often are focused on confrontation. So another set of techniques that we're talking about under this category are based on the premise that in the struggle between those who are pro-status quo and those who are pro-change, resistance is an aspect of the change effort, and therefore the dynamics of conflict is inherent in the social action effort. So this is a strategy that signifies a more militant approach, if you will, and it may include strikes or boycotts like we've talked about. It might include fasts or tax refusal or sit-ins or the like. It might also include things like riots and guerrilla warfare, though these may be omitted by many other change agents, as any use of violence will be unacceptable to values and ethics, especially of some professional groups like for social workers. We probably would not engage in anything that utilized violence of any kind. And the last social action strategy or category of social action strategies is referred to as target meetings. So target meetings often involve direct negotiations, but they might also include things like a lobby day or an accountability session or something that highlights a day in the life of someone or something, or someone experiencing an issue or something like that. So for example, a direct negotiation with the target might be seen through collective bargaining, which is usually what happens with labor unions and employers. An example of a lobby day would be something you have probably participated in, is our annual NASW lobby day, where everyone goes to the state capitol and advocates for social change in regard to specific topics of interest that we may be advocating for at any given point in time. Social workers, by the way, are not the only ones that have an annual lobby day. Other professional groups and other cause organizations also use lobby days as a technique for targeted meetings and such as an effort to affect social change. Accountability sessions, you might see examples of this with election candidates for different positions. Sometimes you'll see this when, like for example, during the pandemic, there were some accountability sessions held between the Senate and Congress and heads of departments or agencies like the CDC or the FDA, for example, and looking for answers or accountability to information and decisions that have been made around the coronavirus. But you might see that around any particular issue at a local or state level, where mayors or council people or state legislators maybe have public meetings where their constituents have the opportunity to face off with them and ask questions and hold them accountable for their actions in legislature or city council or whatever. So those are some examples of those kinds of targeted meetings. Some examples of a day in the life of quote unquote actions might be if you've seen any video campaigns around mental illness, for example. So maybe there's kind of a popular one on the day in the life of someone with bipolar disorder, for example, or a day in the life of someone living with schizophrenia. We even have in social work, we have a book called A Day in the Life of Social Workers. There's videos on that as well. And the whole point is to give you an idea of what it's actually like to live through certain experiences or to be involved in certain situations that really need some kind of social action taken in order to address the social issue and make it better for the people that are experiencing it. So this is just a specific technique that some people might use in order to get their point across and to solicit some kind of support for their cause and to, again, affect change. So now that we looked at the 6 major categories of social action, and within that conversation we also talked about some techniques that might be included or that are examples of those social actions. This slide lists the 9 social action tactics that are often used in those social actions from the previous slide. So these are things that really support those social actions and that might be used to help with the social action strategies that groups or individuals might be engaging in. So things like research, utilizing facts and information that is objective or neutral or solid, that's scientific based, that is, facts and figures and statistically significant. using that research and that evidence base to support your cause, the needs that you're promoting, and the change efforts that you're advocating for. Research is a strong tactic that often allows groups of people to achieve their social action goals. The same with education, providing education, community education and awareness are important tactics to bring about change. And cooperation, kind of related to the collaboration strategy that we talked about, but finding ways to bring people together who have a vested interest in the same cause and who work well together and can cooperate in order to fulfill those different social action strategies to make change. Organization, being able to find different people that, again, are trying to address the same cause, but maybe in different ways, bringing them together so that there's a unified strategy or a unified message that can be used to strengthen your support for your cause. That would be organization and the tactic of organization in order to better affect change in your social goal, your social action goal. Arbitration and negotiation both have to do with the back and forth of discussing situations and trying to come to an agreement or compromising. It might be included in that might be mediation or conflict resolution or some kind of working together to find a common, something that everyone can be happy with. So that is what arbitration and negotiation would entail. Mild coercion is also a social action tactic that is often employed. It's basically trying to persuade people to think or feel a certain way about something, oftentimes using a lot of human emotional kinds of strategies or stories or tactics to really tug at people's heartstrings, if you will. Violation of legal norms. Now, this is a tactic that I kind of mentioned earlier that typically social workers don't try to engage in. But on occasion, some people will violate laws if they view it for the greater good. And so it is a tactic that is obviously employed by some groups of people. And joint action, when you have multiple groups that have common interests, even if they have different goals, but there's common interests, you can still gain support from each other. You can borrow ideas and resources oftentimes to piggyback on what each other is doing. So you collaborate and cooperate together and come up with some type of a joint action tactic that might be employed to help you with your strategic strategies for social action. So that leads us next to what are best practices when it comes to social action. So this slide talks more about the qualities of social action. So we often find that these key attributes consistently help some actions perform better than others. So when it comes to emotional, we're talking about things that evoke an immediate emotional response. Supporters must feel compelled to get involved. When you can pull on those emotions, those human emotions, your action efforts are often going to lead to a successful outcome. If your problem that you've identified is viewed as solvable, that will also help. It must feel like the action can really help make a difference. For instance, people may feel more likely to be able to save a wolf than to stop big oil. Urgency. It must require an immediate response. So people, your audience, your target audience should feel like it will be too late if they stop to think or come back to the issue later. They must feel like they have to take action now. So that sense of urgency is important to a strategy or a campaign success. It also helps if the action is directed at someone or something that the person or group or the audience can identify. So the support should feel like his or her actions as a human connection to it, and that it's tangible. So it has to have some type of directed action attached to it. Also, what makes for a successful social action strategy is that the action must be something that people want their friends to see, and they want their friends to take action on it as well. So it should positively help define your audience as people in general. So they should want to have their friends see what they're doing and what causes they're supporting, and they should want their friends to help them with it as well. So having that strong sense of identity as part of your action plan can lead to a successful outcome. And the last key strategy has to do with making a clear ask. So don't confuse people or make them wonder how to get involved. Make the ask be visible and obvious, no mixed messages. That makes it very confusing, and people are less likely to care or want to understand better or want to help in whatever way they can. So if you've got these key strategies in your action plan where the ideas are emotional, solvable, urgent, directed, identity, and make a clear ask, you're more likely to have a successful outcome of change. So putting all of those together, you might think about having active participation, having people being appropriately educated, and having people involved in public advocacy, because those all build together and create a successful social action plan. So now that we know what a good strategy or what best practices are for social action strategies are, now it's probably a good idea to look at some of the poor practices that lead to ineffective action. So some of the qualities that are found to not be helpful for successful social action are things like poor community education and involvement, lacking that commitment from your target audience or supporters or potential allies or resources. If you don't have their support, you're not going to make anything change that you are trying to address. Poor communication and messaging. So again, not having mixed messages, not keeping a constant message visible or in people's face. That seems to, have the issues kind of fall to the wayside or get swept under the rug, and therefore no action usually happens. Having a lack of constancy and visibility related to that. If you don't keep it in the forefront, people are going to forget about your cause, and no action is going to be taken. Utilizing a top-down approach is also not helpful. So that basically means that people maybe who have some type of power or authority, or who are in, a hierarchical infrastructure, people at the top that think they know what's best for somebody else or a community or a group of people, they're the ones making the decisions and implementing their change strategies without really including anyone else in that. That's a top-down approach. And when those are used, they usually don't work. And similarly, the outsider insider dilemma can also be a barrier to change. So when outsiders impose their beliefs or ideas or make decisions on behalf of the people or the communities or the groups that are being targeted for social change, when they come in and say what's best without including the voice or the opinions or the participation of the parties that are going to be directly affected by any social change efforts, that's almost guaranteed to be a failure of any social change. You've got to include your target audience. You have to include the people that are directly involved in or experiencing the social issue that you care to affect change with. Otherwise, it's not going to happen without their buy-in and their participation. So those are the main things that will lead to an ineffective social action plan that's going to result in no changes that you're looking for. So lastly, I just end with this quote from John Wooden: "Failure is not fatal, but failing to change might be." So the key ingredients to social change include mass mobilization, social action, citizen participation, public advocacy, popular education, and the development of local services. The beauty of social change is that it unites a community and shows the importance of awareness for public issues in order to ignite the force that is social change.